They say man is free, but freedom terrifies him. He speaks of liberty with trembling lips, clutching his chains like sacred relics, not because he loves them, but because they give him something worse than freedom ever could, the illusion of safety. In the quiet corners of his heart, where no slogans echo and no crowds cheer, he knows the truth. He would rather kneel in familiar despair than stand in the storm of possibility. Because real freedom, true, naked freedom, demands something unbearable responsibility. Responsibility for one's thoughts, for one's failures, for one's becoming. That is the weight that most souls, trembling before the mirror of their potential, quietly refuse to carry. And so they build shrines to their limitations, decorate their prisons with routines, and call it peace. But this is no peace. This is the despair Søren Kierkegaard warned of, not the despair of suffering, but the despair of potential never touched, the despair of the man who knows he could become more and chooses not to. We live in a time of great noise, a time when voices are many but souls are hollow, when man believes he is choosing, but every choice is dictated by algorithms, applause, and ancient patterns he dares not examine. His gods are comfort and consensus. His cross is carried by others. And he wonders why his life feels weightless, why joy escapes him even when pleasures are abundant. It is because he has outsourced his freedom to avoid the agony of choice. And choice, real choice, is agony. It is the moment when no one can tell you who to be, when every road splits and no signs appear, when you are asked not what you desire, but who you are willing to become. And this, above all, is what the modern man flees. He flees himself. The truth is not hidden, it's avoided, rejected, mocked, because truth doesn't comfort, truth confronts, it pierces, it divides, it calls the coward a coward and the liar a liar. And when truth speaks, the masses do not listen. They distract, they scroll, they buy, they consume. Anything to drown out the sound of their own soul whispering, "You were meant for more." The average man does not want the truth. He wants sedation. And sedation has many forms: entertainment, ideology, self-help dressed as surrender. But the root is always the same: to escape the responsibility of freedom, to say, "I had no choice. They made me. This is just how I am." And in that moment the soul dies a little, not from pain, but from cowardice. You were not born to be safe. You were not born to be small. You were not born to obey voices you do not recognize. But the world will offer you slavery, warm, smiling, and convenient. And if you're not vigilant, you'll take it. They'll give you a path, a role, a schedule, a screen. They'll pat your head when you comply and scorn you when you don't, not because they are evil, but because they too are afraid. And nothing terrifies the herd more than one who refuses to kneel. Kierkegaard called this the despair of the self that does not want to be itself. It is not the fear of failure that paralyzes man. It is the fear of becoming, because becoming requires death. The death of all you've pretended to be, the death of every excuse you've cherished, the death of comfort, the death of sleep, to become free. You must die to who you were, and no one will do it for you. There is no algorithm that can awaken your soul. No guru can rescue you, no pill, no program, no priest. It is you, and only you who must walk into the void and say, "I am willing to face myself." But most people don't. They become profiles, brands, predictable echoes of their culture. They curate their cages and fear the silence that would force them to hear their own hunger. And yet, that hunger remains, buried beneath the noise, beneath the pretending, beneath the layers of borrowed desires and unchosen beliefs. This hunger, this divine ache, it is the mark of your freedom. Not the freedom to consume, but the freedom to transform, the freedom to say, "I will not be a copy. I will not be a passenger in my own life." The freedom to tear down the false self and meet the wild, terrible, beautiful mystery beneath. That mystery is you. And you are not what they told you, not your name, your job, your past. You are not your trauma. You are not your likes. You are not your fears. You are something unnameable, unrepeatable, and infinitely responsible for what it becomes. But to embrace that is to reject the world's offer of easy answers. You must walk alone. You must feel the tremble of your own uncertainty and keep walking anyway. You must abandon the religion of consensus and build your own cathedral of conviction. You must become sovereign, not by ruling others, but by mastering yourself. And self-mastery is not dominance. It is discipline. It is the refusal to betray your own potential. It is the courage to sit with your pain, your shadow, your weakness, and transmute them into strength. It is a quiet, relentless fire, not the fire of rage, but of clarity, of knowing deeply, irrevocably, that your life is your responsibility, that no one is coming, that every delay is a decision, that your soul is the battlefield between what is easy and what is true. This is the burden of freedom, and this is why most refuse it. They want freedom without weight, freedom without blood. But that is not freedom, that is fantasy. Real freedom costs. It costs comfort. It costs approval. It costs who you were yesterday. But what it gives in return is everything. But most don't want everything. Not really. They want certainty. They want the map without the wilderness. They want guarantees before they leap. They want someone to tell them, this is who you'll become, and here's how it will end. But that's not how freedom works. That's not how becoming works. You are not a product. You are a question unfolding, a wound that seeks its own healing by walking barefoot through fire. Spinoza once said that freedom is the recognition of necessity, not the absence of it. The free man does not wish away the forces of the world. He does not pray to be spared the storm. He stands in it and acts in accordance with his nature. He chooses not by whim, but by wisdom. He does not react, he responds, because he knows to be free is not to escape reality, but to align with it. But how many dare to look reality in the eye? We invent fantasies because we fear the rawness of life. We crave ideologies because they give us a script, a mask, a tribe, anything to avoid the cold, liberating truth that nothing, absolutely nothing, can replace the work of becoming conscious. And consciousness hurts. It is the awakening to what we've ignored, seeing things we'd rather keep buried. Jung warned that modern man is in danger of losing his shadow, of becoming so sanitized, so edited, so filtered, that he no longer confronts the wild beast within. But freedom begins there, not in the light, but in the dark. Not in the mirror, but in the cave where your ego dies, where your false self clings to the walls as it disintegrates, where every role you played, every belief you inherited, every mask you wore begins to melt under the heat of truth. And that's when you have a choice, to rebuild yourself or return to the lie. Most choose the lie. It's easier to say, this is who I am, than to admit, I haven't met myself yet. It's easier to conform to the shape expected of you than to carve your own. It's easier to be what your culture rewards than to risk becoming what your soul demands. But ease is the currency of slavery, and comfort, when worshipped, becomes a coffin. True freedom is found in friction, in resistance, in the weight of responsibility that breaks the weak and births the real. This is why Nietzsche told us to love our fate, to say yes to everything, even the suffering, because it is through suffering that the self is forged. Not the suffering of victimhood, but of transformation, the voluntary death of illusion, the sacred brutality of becoming who you are. And so few want this, even though they feel the call. They hear it in the silence after the noise fades, in the moment when the applause stops and the mirror remains, in the ache that no pleasure cures, in the restlessness that no success calms, in the strange emptiness that creeps into even the most perfect lives. That's the call to freedom. But to answer it, you must stop running. You must stop blaming. You must stop hiding behind the masks of society and look at the raw, unfiltered essence of your being, not with judgment, but with fierce honesty. And then you must choose. Anxiety, according to Kierkegaard, is the dizziness of freedom, the instant when all possibilities become available and you stand shaking in the face of the infinite. The average person, frightened, decides to give up instead. The hopelessness of the known, the misery of daily life, the anguish of living below one's ability in order to escape the fear of what might be. However, that fear is sacrosanct. It is the gateway to genuineness. Every true act of will must go through this barrier. You can't get away from it. All you can do is pass through it. Those that do, however, are never the same. They start to pose a threat to the falsehood, not to other people. By refusing to be its product, they pose a threat to the system. They become completely alive, defying convention, because a free soul is a revolution. Not loud, not violent, but absolute. It does not beg for permission. It does not seek applause. It does not conform, flatter, or compromise. It burns with a silent, steady flame. It thinks. It chooses. It becomes. And that is what society fears most. Not chaos, not crime, not conflict, but the individual who dares to live without masks, who takes the burden of existence upon his own shoulders, who refuses to be a slave, even if the chains are made of gold. The sovereign soul is not rare because it is hard to find. It is rare because it is hard to build. It requires the death of all illusions, the abandonment of comfort, the confrontation of one's own darkness, and the discipline to rise again and again when every voice inside says, quit, sleep, conform. But you were not made for sleep. You were not made to fit. You were made to awaken, and awakening is war, not against others, but against every false layer of yourself, against every lie you inherited, against every part of you that says, stay small, stay safe, stay silent. To awaken is to become your own authority, your own compass, your own law. But with that freedom comes solitude. The herd will not follow, the crowd will not applaud. You will be misunderstood, misjudged, even hated, but you will be free, and that is worth everything. What then is this freedom that asks everything of us? It is not found in the shouts of revolution, nor in the slogans of the age. It is not the indulgence to do what you want, nor the license to evade consequence. Real freedom, the kind that burns clean through your illusions, is a discipline. It is the ruthless allegiance to truth, even when it costs you everything false. And yet the world sells you shadows. It offers substitutions, comforts in the shape of liberty, choices without meaning, pleasures without purpose. We mistake distraction for liberation, noise for knowledge, and movement for progress. But beneath it all, we are still slaves to impulse, to approval, to the narratives we never dared to question. You can dress a cage in velvet. You can teach a man to love his leash. But deep down, he knows. He knows that no amount of entertainment, no number of followers, no polished persona, no corporate ladder will quiet the quiet cry within, I am not living as I could. That cry is the soul's revolt. Descartes began with doubt, not to destroy certainty, but to find it. Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. He stripped the world down to its bones and asked, what can I know for sure? And in that terrifying silence he found the self. But modern man no longer doubts. He assumes, he absorbs, he imitates, he believes in what is trending, what is safe, and what is sanctioned. He repeats what he is told, with the confidence of those who've never questioned. And so he becomes hollow, full of noise, empty of truth. To think is a risk. To doubt is dangerous. Because if you begin to question what you've been told about yourself, about life, about what matters, the house begins to fall. but let it fall. Let every brittle belief crumble, because only when you stand in the ruins of the false can you begin to build the true. The courage to think is the birth of the soul. Not to memorize, not to conform, but to wrestle with reality, naked and alone. To ask again and again, not what is popular, but what is real. This is the beginning of freedom, but it is not comfortable. It is not safe. It will not win you applause. You will be exiled from the tribe of the predictable. You will walk without signposts. You will become a stranger in the land of consensus. But you will be alive, and that is the rarest thing of all, to live, not to exist, not to consume, but to burn with the unbearable clarity of awareness, to feel the weight of your decisions, to know that your time is short, that your soul is on the line, that no one can save you but yourself. Most flee from this. They hide in crowds. They drown in roles. They anesthetize with substances, with scrolling, with status. Because the silence, raw silence of self-awareness is deafening. But only in that silence can the real voice speak, the voice that does not come from books or parents or preachers, the voice that whispers not what you should do but what you must become. And it will not plead with you, it will not shout, it will wait, endlessly, for you to be still enough to hear. But most will never hear it, not because they are evil, but because they are busy avoiding themselves, busy becoming what the world rewards, busy editing their image while their essence decays. They trade the fire of freedom for the fog of familiarity, because fire burns, and becoming is not safe. You will lose friends, you will offend the herd, you will be called arrogant, difficult, and delusional. But worse than any insult from others is the betrayal of yourself. When you say yes to slavery, to the comfort that corrodes, to the safety that suffocates, to the lie that lets you sleep, you kill something sacred. You kill your possibility. Schopenhauer wrote that the will, the deep, blind, striving force within, is the core of life, not intellect, not pleasure. Will, the will to live, to endure, to push against the void. But that must be owned, or it owns you. If you do not seize it, it becomes an impulse, compulsion, addiction. You become driven by forces you never chose, chasing appetites that never end, and you call that freedom. But it is slavery, slavery in motion, slavery with a smile, slavery disguised as desire. Freedom is not doing what you want. It is becoming who you are, and that requires the courage to confront what you are not, to say no when the world demands yes, to walk out of the cave when the shadows dance. Plato warned us of this. That is when the freedman returns to the cave, the chained man mocks him. They hate him, not because he is wrong, but because he reminds them that they too are in chains, and they would rather destroy the truth than face their own imprisonment. This is the tragedy of man. He will burn the world before he burns his mask. But you are not most people. You have heard something, felt something, that slight crack in the illusion, that tiny flame in the dark. Do not ignore it. Do not smother it with excuses. Do not call it madness. Do not bury it under what is practical. Feed it. Let it grow. Let it consume everything that is not real and show you who you were before the world told you who to be. Because that is the path, not back, not forward, but inward, not to become what they expect, but to become what you were born to awaken. And that will cost you everything that isn't truly yours. So what remains when the false is stripped away, when the applause fades, when the comfort rots, when the body ages and the masks crack under the pressure of time? What remains is the only thing that was ever truly yours, the soul that chose to face itself. It is not loud, it is not glamorous, it doesn't trend, but it endures. It doesn't beg for heaven, because it has built one within. It doesn't fear hell, because it has walked through it willingly. It knows what it is, and therefore cannot be bought, cannot be threatened, cannot be moved by the storms that shake lesser men. This is what it means to become sovereign, to belong to no master, not the state, not society, not even your past self, to kneel before no God that demands unconscious obedience, to speak, think, act, not from programming, but from principle. You are not free because they let you be. You are free because you took the unbearable weight of that freedom and held it, and you didn't run, you stayed. You listened to the silence until it became your teacher. You watched the shadows until you saw your own shape. You let the illusions die even when it felt like you were dying with them. And from that death, the death of falsehood, the death of fear, something emerged. Not a new identity, not a better mask, but a presence, a power, an essence that cannot be taught, only earned through confrontation, through solitude, through the sacred fire of self-responsibility. This is the great becoming, not a transformation imposed from the outside, but a birth from within. And it is available to every soul yet claimed by so few, because most people choose slavery, not with chains, but with silence, not with violence, but with agreement. They nod, they smile, they play the part. They collect the rewards of obedience and pay for them with their soul. Because freedom, when unchosen, becomes your tormentor. It haunts the edges of your life. It shows up in your regrets. It whispers in your sleepless nights. It confronts you in the mirror with the question you can't silence. What could I have become? And that question is a blade. It does not wound the skin. It cuts into time, into your story, into your eternity. This is the truth no system will tell you. No school, no religion, no government. Because a free man cannot be controlled. He cannot be seduced with trivial rewards. He does not panic in chaos. He does not obey out of fear. He is not against the world, but he is not owned by it. And that makes him dangerous. You don't need to be a genius. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be fearless. What you do need to decide: will you keep sleepwalking through someone else's dream? Or will you wake and step into the fire of your own? This isn't poetry, it's a warning, because your life is happening right now, and you're not guaranteed another breath. You're not promised another morning. You're not owed a second chance. You don't have time to wait for the world to change. You are the world, waiting to awaken through you. Everything you've suffered, everything you've feared, everything you've lost. I was preparing you for this moment, the moment when you choose, not once, but every day, to think about when it's easier to repeat, to act when it's safer to stall, to rise when it's more comfortable to kneel. That is the real rebellion, not against others, not against society, but against the part of you that chose to shrink. You must kill that part, not out of hate, but out of love. Love for what you could be, love for the life you haven't yet lived. You are not here to pass the time. You are not here to fulfill someone else's prophecy. You are not here to make peace with your prison. You are here to tear it down, stone by stone, lie by lie, until what stands is not a replica of what you were told, but the revelation of who you are. So when they ask you why you chose the harder road, why did you leave the herd? Why did you give up the safety of pretending? You look them in the eye and say, because I refuse to be a slave. Because once you've tasted the truth, once you've stood naked before your own becoming, once you've seen the face behind the mask and didn't look away, you can never go back. You're not asleep, you're not small, you're not a cog, you're not a copy, you're not theirs, you're free. And from that day forward, everything you do is sacred.